Maya Torres had learned that invisibility came in degrees long before she understood what it meant to be truly seen. It came when landlords looked at her application and suddenly remembered the apartment had just been rented. When she stood outside restaurants at closing time, hoping for discarded food and employees turned off the lights without meeting her eyes. When strangers crossed the street because her backpack and worn jacket marked her as the kind of problem polite people avoided. But on the afternoon the certified letter arrived at the shelter, invisibility took a different shape entirely. Maya Torres, the intake coordinator, called across the common room. Maya looked up from the paperwork she had been filling out for the third time that week. Job applications that went nowhere, housing forms that required addresses she did not have, references from people who had stopped answering her calls. "There's a letter for you," the coordinator said. "Looks official." Maya took the envelope with hands that had learned not to expect good news. The return address read Whitman and Associates, Estate Law, Portland, Oregon. She opened it standing in the hallway because sitting down felt like giving the words too much power. "Dear Ms. Torres, we are writing to inform you of the passing of your grandfather, Robert Calloway, and your designation as sole beneficiary of his remaining estate." Maya read the sentence twice. Her grandfather had been a stranger, a name her mother mentioned only when drunk or angry, usually both. A man who had walked away from his daughter before Maya was born and never looked back. She had no memories of him, no photographs, no reason to expect he remembered she existed. The letter continued in careful legal language, but the essential facts were simple. Robert Calloway had died alone in a cabin in the mountains outside Bend. He had left that cabin to Maya. Nothing else. No money, no savings, no explanation. Just a structure described as remote, aging, and of negligible market value. Maya folded the letter and walked outside into the gray Portland afternoon. Around her, the city moved with the indifferent rhythm she had come to know too well. People with places to go. People who fit. She had been homeless for 9 months. Not the kind of homelessness that made the news or inspired charity campaigns. The invisible kind. The kind where you slept on friends' couches until the friends stopped answering texts, where you worked part-time retail jobs that never gave quite enough hours to afford first and last month's rent, where one missed paycheck, one stolen wallet, one sudden firing became the difference between barely managing and losing everything. Her mother had died 2 years earlier. Liver failure, decades of drinking, a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and regret. Maya had held her hand at the end, but there had been no deathbed reconciliations, no whispered apologies, just shallow breathing and then silence. After that, the slide had been slow, then fast. The shared apartment she could no longer afford alone. The storage unit where she kept what remained of her life until she could not pay for that either. The backpack that became her whole world. 2 changes of clothes, a phone charger, a water bottle, the small stuffed dog she had owned since childhood and could not bring herself to abandon. Now a letter told her she owned property. Maya called the number on the letterhead from a payphone outside a convenience store. A woman answered on the second ring. "Whitman and Associates." "This is Maya Torres. I received a letter about my grandfather's estate." There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. "Yes, Ms. Torres, thank you for calling. I'm Ellen Whitman. I handled your grandfather's affairs. I'm very sorry for your loss." Maya almost laughed. Loss required having something first. "The letter said he left me a cabin." "That's correct. It's located about 20 miles outside Bend, fairly isolated. Your grandfather lived there for the past 30 years. What's it worth?" Another pause, more careful this time. "The property was assessed at approximately $800. The structure is old, and the land parcel is small and difficult to access. I should be clear, Ms. Torres. This is not a valuable inheritance in monetary terms." $800. Maya leaned her forehead against the cold metal of the payphone. It was more than she had. It was also nothing. "Can I sell it?" "You could try. But given the condition and location, finding a buyer would be difficult. I'd be happy to discuss your options in person if you'd like to come to the office." Maya looked down at her worn sneakers, at the backpack sitting between her feet containing everything she owned. She thought about the shelter intake form, about another night on a cot in a room with 40 other women, about the way hope had become something she could no longer afford to feel. "I want to see it first," she said. Ellen Whitman gave her the address and directions. She also gave her a key, which she said could be picked up at the office. Maya took a bus across town the next morning, retrieved the key from a receptionist who looked at her with the particular blend of pity and discomfort people reserved for the visibly poor, and began planning a trip she could not afford to a place she had never been. She sold her phone. It was 3 years old, cracked screen, but it brought $40 from a pawn shop that did not ask questions. With that and the $12 she had saved from her last paycheck, she bought a Greyhound ticket to Bend. The bus left at midnight. Maya sat in the back and watched Oregon pass in the darkness outside the window. Forests, small towns, gas stations glowing like lonely islands in the black. She did not sleep. Sleeping on buses meant risking your belongings, and she had so little left that losing any of it felt unbearable. Bend appeared at dawn, all clean streets and coffee shops that had not opened yet. Maya walked to the edge of town and started hitchhiking. A man in a pickup truck stopped after 20 minutes. He was older, weathered, kind in the way rural people sometimes were when they recognized hardship without needing it explained. "Where you headed?" he asked. Maya gave him the address from the letter. He frowned. "That's up in the hills, not much out there." "I know." He drove her as far as the turnoff, a dirt road that wound up into pine forest. "You sure about this?" he asked as she climbed out. "No," Maya said, "but I'm here anyway." She walked the rest of the way. The road was rough, overgrown in places, clearly unused for months or longer. Her backpack grew heavy. Her feet hurt. But she kept moving because going back meant returning to nothing, and at least this was motion towards something, even if that something was only a cabin worth $800. She saw it just before noon. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by pines, small and dark and leaning slightly to one side as if tired of standing upright. The roof sagged. Windows were filthy. The porch steps had rotted through in places. It looked like the kind of place people abandoned and then forgot on purpose. Maya stopped at the edge of the clearing and stared. This was her inheritance. This was what a man she had never known thought she deserved. A falling down shack in the middle of nowhere. She walked closer. The key felt heavy in her hand. When she reached the porch, a board cracked under her weight and she froze, heart pounding, imagining the whole structure collapsing beneath her. But it held. Maya unlocked the door and pushed it open. The smell hit her first. Dust, mildew, old wood, and something else. The particular staleness of a place where someone had lived alone and then stopped living. Inside was a single room, a narrow bed against one wall, a wood stove in the corner, a table with one chair. Shelves lined with books, their spines faded and cracked, a sink with a hand pump, no electricity, no running water, no heat except what the stove provided. Maya set her backpack down and stood in the center of the room. For a long moment she did not move. Then quietly she began to cry, not because the cabin was terrible though it was, not because she felt cheated though she did, but because standing in that cold, empty space, she realized she had been hoping for something different. Some sign that the man who abandoned her mother had thought about them at the end. Some evidence that blood meant anything at all. But there was nothing. Just an old man's lonely life left behind like trash. She wiped her eyes and looked around more carefully. The bed was made, blankets pulled tight in military corners. The shelves were organized. The floor beneath the dust had been swept. Whoever Robert Calloway had been, he had lived with a kind of order. Maya opened the cupboards. A few cans of soup, expired, a jar of instant coffee, a box of matches. In a drawer she found silverware, a can opener, a folded map of the area. She was about to close the drawer when she noticed the corner of something beneath the map. Paper, yellowed with age, she pulled it out. An envelope unsealed, addressed to no one. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in cramped handwriting. "If you're reading this, then you came. I wasn't sure you would." Maya's breath caught. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I left your mother when she needed me most, and I left you before you were born." I told myself it was because I was broken, because I'd seen things in the war that made me unfit for family. But the truth is simpler and worse. I was a coward. I stayed away because I was afraid of failing again. I stayed away because loneliness felt safer than trying and losing. By the time I understood what I'd done, too many years had passed and I didn't know how to come back. This cabin is all I have. It's not much, but it's yours now. And if you're anything like your mother was before I ruined her, maybe you'll see what I couldn't. There's more here than wood and nails. Look beneath the surface. Start with the stove. Maya read the letter 3 times. Her hands shook. Anger and grief tangled together in her chest until she could not tell them apart. She looked at the wood stove. It was old, cast iron, sitting on a stone base. She crossed the room and knelt beside it. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then she noticed the stones beneath it were not mortared together. They were loose. Maya pulled at one. It shifted. She pulled harder and it came free, revealing a gap beneath. Her heart began to pound. She removed another stone, then another. Beneath the stove was a hollow space, and inside that space was a metal box. Maya lifted it out with trembling hands. It was heavy, locked with a small padlock. She looked around the cabin frantically, then remembered the drawer. Dumped its contents onto the table. Among the silverware and matches was a small key. It fit. The lock opened with a click that sounded too loud in the silent cabin. Maya lifted the lid. Inside were bundles of cash, old bills wrapped in rubber bands. Beneath them, a stack of papers, land deeds, stock certificates. A savings account passbook showing a balance that made her vision blur. At the bottom was another letter. This is what I saved, not for myself. I stopped wanting things a long time ago. I saved it because I hoped one day I'd be brave enough to find you and give it to you myself. I wasn't. The land deeds are for parcels around this cabin. Timber rights, water access. The stocks are from companies I worked for over the years. The account is everything else. It's not enough to make up for what I took from you, but maybe it's enough to give you what I couldn't. A chance. Maya sat back hard on the floor. The cash alone was more money than she had seen in her life. The deeds, the stocks, the account, if they were real, if they were still valid, this was not $800. This was everything. She looked around the cabin again. At the neat shelves, the made bed, the organized drawers. At the life of a man who had lived alone with his guilt and tried, too late, to make something right. Maya did not know if she forgave him. She did not know if forgiveness was even the right word for what she felt. But sitting on the floor of that cabin with her inheritance spread around her, she understood something she had not before. Robert Calloway had been broken, but he had also been human. And in the end, he had done the only thing he knew how to do. He had left her a way out. Maya stayed in the cabin that night. She built a fire in the stove using wood stacked against the outside wall. She ate soup from one of the expired cans and did not care that it tasted like metal. She lay on the narrow bed under blankets that smelled like dust and time, and for the first time in 9 months she slept without fear. In the morning she walked back down the dirt road to town. She found a library and used their computer to look up the stock certificates. They were real. The companies still existed. The shares had split, grown, multiplied over decades. She called Ellen Whitman from the library phone. "Ms. Torres," the lawyer said, "have you seen the cabin?" "I've seen more than the cabin," Maya said. "I need help." Ellen Whitman was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me everything." It took 6 weeks to sort through the legal details. The deeds were valid. The stocks were worth more than Maya had dared hope. The savings account, untouched for years, had grown with interest into a sum that made her feel dizzy when she saw it written down. By the time everything was finalized, Maya Torres was no longer homeless. She was no longer invisible. She owned land, assets, a future that looked nothing like the one she had imagined standing outside that shelter in Portland. But she did not sell the cabin. Instead, she hired a contractor to repair it. New roof, new porch, new windows. She kept the wood stove, she kept the shelves of books, she kept the narrow bed, and when the work was done, she moved in. People asked her why. Why stay in the mountains? Why live in a place so remote, so small, when she could afford something better? Maya's answer was always the same, because this is where I learned I was worth finding. She used part of the money to go back to school. She studied social work, driven by the memory of intake forms and shelter cots, and the particular loneliness of being poor in a country that treated poverty like a moral failure. She used another part to start a fund. Small grants for women in crisis, rent deposits, first month's utilities, bus tickets, the kinds of amounts that seemed tiny to people who had never needed them and enormous to people who had. She named it the Callaway Fund, after the grandfather she never knew and the mother he had failed, not as forgiveness, as acknowledgement, as a way of saying that broken people could still leave something whole behind. Years passed. The cabin became a place Maya returned to when the world felt too loud. She would drive up the dirt road, unlock the door, and sit in the chair by the wood stove reading her grandfather's books. She found notes in the margins, underlined passages, evidence of a mind that had kept thinking even in isolation. Some of the books were about war, others about wilderness. Many were about regret. One afternoon she found a photograph tucked into a book about the Oregon forests. It showed a young woman with dark hair and a cautious smile. On the back, in her grandfather's handwriting, was a single word: Deanne, her mother. Maya stared at the photograph for a long time. She had never seen her mother look that young, that uncertain, that almost happy. It was like glimpsing a person who had existed before pain reshaped her into someone else. She placed the photograph on the shelf beside the wood stove, not to forgive, not to forget, but to remember that everyone, even the people who hurt us, started as someone softer. By the time Maya turned 30, the Callaway Fund had helped more than 200 women. Some found jobs, some found housing, some simply found a moment to breathe between crises. Maya met many of them. She listened to their stories and heard echoes of her own: the missed payments, the lost apartments, the slow slide from stability into chaos, the invisibility that came with being poor and female and alone. And she told them what no one had told her during those 9 months when she carried everything she owned in a backpack. You are not disposable. You are not a mistake. You are worth more than the worst thing that happened to you. Some believed her, some did not. But she said it anyway because words like that needed saying whether or not they landed. One winter evening Maya sat in the cabin with snow falling outside and a fire burning in the stove. She was reading another of her grandfather's books when she found a final letter tucked into the back pages. This one was different, shorter, written in a shakier hand. I am dying. The doctor says weeks, maybe a month. I am not afraid. I have been alone so long that death feels like a familiar country. But I am afraid you will think this inheritance is about money. It is not. The money is only a tool. What I am really leaving you is a choice. You can use it to build walls or bridges, to isolate or connect, to hoard or share. I spent my life building walls. I thought they would keep me safe. Instead, they kept me alone. Do better than I did. Be braver. Maya folded the letter and held it in her hands. Outside, the snow continued to fall, silent and steady. Inside, the fire crackled. She thought about the women the fund had helped. She thought about the shelter in Portland where she had once slept on a cot and felt invisible. She thought about her mother, young and smiling in a photograph, before life taught her to expect disappointment. And she thought about Robert Callaway, a man who had failed the people he loved but left behind something that allowed his granddaughter to succeed where he could not. The inheritance was not the money. It was the choice. Maya stood and walked to the window. The forest stretched in every direction, dark and deep and beautiful. The cabin was warm. The stove burned steady. And for the first time since she had received that certified letter in a Portland shelter, Maya understood what her grandfather had really left her. Not wealth, not property, not even forgiveness. He had left her the chance to turn pain into purpose, to take what had been hidden and make it visible, to build bridges instead of walls. Maya pressed her hand against the cold window glass and whispered into the quiet cabin, "I'll do better." And she did.